I never thought my younger brother, Mason, could betray me like this. We've always had a complicated sibling relationship. Not hostile, just competitive. I'm 32, he's 28, and our parents, Robert and Elaine, have always favored harmony over confrontation. Mom passed away 5 years ago, leaving Dad and us trying to navigate life without her steadying presence. Dad's a retired aerospace engineer, brilliant, meticulous, and protective of family legacy. It all started 3 months ago when Dad mentioned updating his will. He wasn't dramatic about it, just said he wanted to make sure everything was orderly, maybe set aside some funds for charity, and ensure Mason and I were treated fairly. I didn't think much of it, but Mason, he seemed to hear something else entirely. The first incident happened at a Sunday brunch at Dad's house. Mason picked up one of my baby pictures, studying it like a detective examining a crime scene. He squinted at my features and said, "You know, you never really looked like Mom or Dad here. I always wondered where you came from." I laughed it off, assuming he was joking, but then he leaned closer, whispering almost conspiratorially, "Seriously, have you ever thought about whether you're actually theirs?" I froze. I've always known where I came from. Mom carried me to term, Dad changed my diapers, attended every recital, coached every little league game. But Mason was staring at me like I had been living a lie my whole life. His tone wasn't playful, it was accusatory. Over the next few weeks, his comments escalated. At our cousin Leela's wedding, I overheard him telling Aunt Clara that he suspected something wasn't right about me. When he saw me listening, he smirked like he had just uncovered a hidden truth. I confronted him later, but he acted casual, claiming he was just curious about family history. What unsettled me most wasn't the suspicion itself, it was the intensity. Mason became obsessed with genetics, ancestry, and family resemblance. He sent me articles about cases where siblings discovered shocking secrets about their lineage. He started dropping hints in front of Dad, insisting that DNA testing could reveal the real truth about family connections. One evening, Mason cornered me at Dad's study and asked without preamble, "Have you ever wondered if you're adopted?" My chest tightened. I stared at him, speechless. He smiled faintly, almost proud of his own boldness. "I mean, you're different. You don't match the family the way I do." I tried to brush it off, telling him it was absurd, but I couldn't shake the unease. Mason wasn't just teasing, he was convinced of something, and he was starting to manipulate family gatherings, subtly planting doubt about me with everyone he could. I went to Dad for advice, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I just said Mason had been a little stressed and weird lately. Dad nodded, thinking it was work stress, nothing more. Yet, something in Mason had shifted. The timing with Dad's will, his sudden obsession with DNA, and his increasingly manipulative comments, it all pointed to something more than curiosity. My gut told me he was plotting something. I just didn't know what. Things escalated fast. Mason somehow convinced Dad that our family should do a genealogy project. At first, it sounded innocent, tracking relatives, building a family tree, maybe even connecting with distant cousins. Dad loved the idea. He's always been fascinated by family history, and Mason played it perfectly, presenting himself as organized and thoughtful. Mason called it a heritage initiative, claiming it would be a meaningful way for us to honor Mom's memory while learning more about our lineage. He even made a color-coded chart of relatives, printed out articles about DNA testing, and offered to handle all logistics. Dad was impressed. I was suspicious. Mason insisted that everyone's DNA be tested to make the family tree accurate, emphasizing that my sample was critical because I represented the direct line from Dad. I hesitated. Something about the way he phrased it, so insistent, so strategic, felt wrong. But refusing would look strange. Mason knew that. If I didn't participate, he'd claim I was hiding something. And Dad, unaware of Mason's true intentions, would likely take it at face value. At the first family meeting for the project, Mason presented a slideshow with maps, historical documents, and hypothetical ancestral connections. He made it feel exciting, like a treasure hunt. He carefully orchestrated the conversation so that Dad would praise his thoroughness, while I was subtly made to feel like I should prove my commitment to the family. It was brilliant manipulation. Everyone admired Mason's initiative, and I was cornered into participating. During the discussion, Mason casually said, sometimes these tests reveal surprises. A lot of families discover unexpected parentage or long-lost relatives. It's amazing what science can tell us. He looked at me as he said it, smiling, but it wasn't friendly. My stomach twisted. I realized then that this wasn't just about family history. This was about him trying to prove something about me. Over the next few weeks, he became the gatekeeper of the project. He collected all the DNA kits personally, scheduled family meetings, and carefully documented everyone's submissions. He would talk about the importance of accuracy and scientific integrity, all while I grew more paranoid. I noticed that he had started texting me constantly, reminding me to submit my sample on time, giving me very precise instructions about the saliva collection process. The tone wasn't casual, it was controlling. At a barbecue with Dad's extended family, Mason brought up the project again. He described in detail how the DNA testing could uncover hidden truths about parentage. Cousins and aunts nodded politely, not realizing the subtext. Mason seemed to relish this subtle psychological pressure, and I could see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. I felt trapped. I knew what he was aiming for, and I had no idea how to stop him without creating a huge confrontation that would shock Dad. By this point, I had started documenting everything secretly: texts, emails, even photos of the DNA kits. I needed proof in case things went wrong. Mason was clever, and I feared he would try to manipulate the results or twist the narrative. I told myself I needed to stay calm, play along, and wait for the right moment. But every family dinner, every group chat, every innocent comment from him made me feel like I was walking through a minefield. It was becoming clear, Mason wasn't just obsessed with genealogy, he was obsessed with me, specifically proving that I wasn't Dad's son. And he had a plan. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. The DNA kits arrived at Mason's apartment since he'd positioned himself as the project manager. He texted the family group chat that everything had arrived and he'd distribute them at our convenience. He stressed again that it was best practice to collect all the samples at once and mail them together to ensure uniform processing. Everyone thought it was thoughtful. I thought it was suspicious. I was supposed to pick up my kit from him on a Wednesday evening, but a last-minute work emergency kept me late. I texted Mason and told him I'd swing by the next day. He replied that it was fine and that he'd leave my kit on his kitchen counter with a note. When I arrived at his apartment, his roommate let me in. "Mason's out running errands," he said, gesturing toward the counter. "Your kit's right there." 2 kits sat side by side on the counter. One had a sticky note with my name. The box had already been opened. That struck me as odd. These kits are supposed to be sealed. I opened it to check if everything was there, and my heart stopped. The saliva collection tube wasn't empty. Someone had already spat in it. For a full minute, I just stared at it, my mind spinning. This wasn't a mix-up. The forms inside the box clearly had my name on them. Mason hadn't just handed me a random relative sample by mistake. He was about to submit someone else's DNA under my name. I called him immediately. "What the hell is going on with my test kit?" He played dumb. "What are you talking about?" I told him the tube already had saliva in it. Silence. Then, after a long pause, he laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Relax, it's a joke. I wanted to see if you'd notice. You did. Congrats." I wasn't laughing. Whose DNA is in that tube? He tried to brush me off again, but I kept pressing until he finally admitted it. He'd asked a coworker, someone I'd never met named Kelsey, to spit in the tube. She had no relation to us whatsoever. "Mason, do you understand what you were about to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "If you send Kelsey's DNA under my name, the results will obviously show no relation to Dad. You'd be committing fraud." He didn't see it that way. He started talking faster, his tone defensive. "If you're really Dad's kid, you shouldn't be afraid of the truth. If you're not, this will expose it. I'm protecting Dad's interests. He deserves to know." I was stunned. His logic was warped. He seemed to think submitting someone else's DNA would somehow reveal my real identity. I told him flat out that what he was doing was insane. He called me paranoid. I hung up and sat in my car trembling. This wasn't sibling rivalry, this was sabotage. Mason had crossed a line. When I got home, I ordered my own DNA test directly from the company's website. No middleman, no Mason. I was going to send my sample myself with full tracking. If Mason wanted the truth, I'd give him the truth. But I also started saving screenshots of our texts, photos of the tampered kit, anything to prove what he'd done if this blew up. I had no idea then just how far Mason's obsession would go once the real results came in. I received my DNA results a week later. I expected relief, a sense that this insane chapter might finally be over. The report confirmed exactly what I already knew. I am 50% related to Dad, clear matches with our aunts and cousins, ancestry lines fully consistent with the family history. Everything checked out. I am undeniably Dad's son. I thought showing Mason the results would end it. I figured he'd be embarrassed, maybe apologize, and the project could continue normally, or at least stop being a personal attack on me. I couldn't have been more wrong. I brought the report to his apartment the next day, trying to keep my tone calm. Look, Mason, here's the test. It proves I'm your brother, Dad's biological child. It's all accurate. He took the paper from me, scanning it like a detective examining evidence in a cold case. Then he looked up, his eyes bright but unreadable. "Where did you order this?" he asked. "Did you do it yourself? Are you sure the lab didn't mix up the samples? Who else handled it?" I explained patiently. I ordered it directly from the lab, collected the sample myself, tracked every step online, documented it with photos, everything airtight. "It's accurate," I said. "You can check it online with the tracking number." Mason shook his head. No, this can't be right. You've manipulated something. The lab could have swapped kits, contaminated the sample, something. You're hiding the truth." I stared at him in disbelief. The proof was right there, in black and white, and he refused to see it. His obsession had grown beyond reason. Everything I said to calm him only fed his suspicion. He started listing evidence I couldn't argue with. The way I laughed differently than Dad, the way I held my fork at dinner, how I apparently always acted too eager to fit in with the family. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just frustrating, it was terrifying. Mason wasn't just suspicious, he was rewriting reality to suit his obsession. Even incontrovertible evidence couldn't pierce the narrative he'd constructed in his mind. Worse, he began contacting other family members individually, planting doubts about me. He convinced Dad's cousin Luke to talk to Dad about the possibility that I might not be biologically related, framing it as a concern for Dad's legacy. Luke was confused, unsure what to believe. Dad, already trusting Mason implicitly, started asking questions. At this point, I realized I couldn't handle it alone. Mason's obsession had gone beyond sibling rivalry. It was now endangering my reputation within the family and putting Dad in the middle. I started compiling everything, texts, emails, photos of the tampered kits, to create a timeline of his behavior. I knew I'd have to confront Dad eventually. For now, I decided to stay calm, let him continue his campaign, and wait for another opportunity to reveal the truth. But every family dinner, every phone call, every text from Mason made me feel like I was trapped in a psychological war I hadn't asked for. I never imagined my own brother could become the architect of so much chaos, all because of paranoia about inheritance. The person I grew up with, who used to play catch with me in the yard, had become someone unrecognizable. Mason wasn't satisfied. The first DNA test proving I'm Dad's son wasn't enough. He insisted we needed a second round, this time with a different, independent lab to verify the results. He framed it as thoroughness, a scientific precaution, but I knew exactly why. He wanted another chance to manufacture proof that I didn't belong. He started calling family members individually, explaining that DNA testing can be unreliable and that it was important to confirm results across multiple labs. His tone was calm, rational sounding, almost persuasive. Some relatives agreed, thinking it was a cautious approach. Dad, naturally trusting Mason, said he'd participate and encouraged the rest of the family to do the same. I realized I had no choice. Refusing would only make me look guilty, and Mason would spin it as further evidence that I was hiding something. I ordered my own kit from the second lab, making sure Mason had no access. I documented everything meticulously. Photos of the sealed box, timestamps, delivery tracking. I refused to let him manipulate this round. At the next family gathering, Mason couldn't hide his satisfaction. He was presenting the new test as a family integrity check, a way to ensure our lineage is properly documented. Dad praised his diligence. Cousins and aunts were impressed by the effort Mason had put in. And I felt like a pawn in his obsession, trapped in his plan while the family celebrated his initiative. Every time I tried to engage with Mason about boundaries, he twisted it. "You're acting defensive. Are you afraid of the truth?" he asked, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. Even his questions about mundane things, how I brushed my hair, how I laughed, the way I gestured, were framed as clues about my parentage. I started keeping a notebook, writing down his comments and actions, because the more he escalated, the more I feared he might involve Dad in something irreversible. I was exhausted. Each interaction with Mason left me drained, anxious, second-guessing myself. I had never imagined my own brother could become a source of such psychological pressure. At night, I'd lie awake, wondering how someone could become so fixated on a delusion and convince themselves it's reality. Despite all this, I reminded myself to stay calm. I had concrete proof that I was Dad's biological child. This second test would confirm it. Mason's elaborate schemes and manipulations could not change the truth. I just had to survive the weeks of tension, ensure my sample was untampered, and hope the evidence would finally break through his obsession. The worst part was watching Dad, completely unaware of Mason's motives, praise his son's dedication to family history. I wanted to tell him everything, but I hesitated. Mason had built himself as the reliable, caring son, and I worried that my warnings would sound like paranoia. I had to wait for the right moment to expose the truth, before the obsession escalated any further. The second round of DNA results arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I had tracked the delivery obsessively, made sure Mason never touched the kit, and documented every step. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The results mirrored the first test: 50% match with Dad, clear matches with aunts and cousins, identical ancestry markers. I felt a surge of relief. Finally, there was undeniable proof. I decided to approach Mason privately, thinking maybe he'd finally accept reality. I called him over to my apartment, keeping the report in hand. "Mason, here's the second test," I said calmly. "It confirms everything the first test showed. I'm definitely Dad's son. You can check it yourself." He took the report and stared at it as if it were a foreign language. His eyes flicked up at me, and I expected hesitation, maybe disbelief, but what I got was worse. He didn't waver, he didn't blink. He started questioning the lab. "Are you sure the lab didn't make the same mistake? Maybe there's a contamination issue. Maybe the samples were switched. Did anyone else handle them?" I explained step by step how I had submitted the sample myself, sealed it, and tracked every step. "It's accurate. There's no way it could be wrong," I said firmly. Mason shook his head and smiled, that same unsettling smile I'd seen months ago. "You could be lying about the process," he said. "I don't trust it. I need another lab, a third one, to be certain." My stomach dropped. He wasn't just refusing to accept the evidence, he was escalating. He began calling relatives individually again, planting seeds of doubt about my legitimacy. Cousins, aunts, even distant family members started questioning me, asking awkward, accusatory questions. Dad, once calm, began to frown, sensing tension but unaware of Mason's true motives. I realized then that waiting any longer wasn't an option. Mason's obsession had become dangerous, not physically, but psychologically. He was trying to rewrite the family narrative, dragging everyone into a web of paranoia and mistrust. That night, I drafted a plan. I would sit Dad down, show him all the DNA results, present the timeline of Mason's manipulations, and explain everything: tampering, obsession, deceit. I knew it would be shocking, and Mason would likely spin it as exaggeration, but Dad needed the truth. I went to bed with a knot in my stomach. I had survived months of psychological pressure, subtle attacks, and sabotage attempts. But tomorrow, the confrontation would bring everything to a head. There was no turning back now. The next evening, I asked Dad to sit down with me. His brow was furrowed, sensing that something serious was coming. I had everything organized. Printed copies of both DNA test results, photos of Mason's tampered kit, screenshots of his texts, and a detailed timeline of his manipulation. My hands shook as I laid the documents on the kitchen table. Dad, I started carefully, there's something you need to know about Mason and the genealogy project. I explained everything. How Mason had tampered with the first DNA sample, how he'd tried to submit a coworker's saliva under my name, how he'd orchestrated the family project to make me look suspicious, and how he'd been contacting relatives to cast doubt on my parentage. Dad's face went pale. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a long, tense moment. Then he said, "He's been… what? Why would he do this?" I told him my theory, that Mason's obsession was linked to Dad updating his will, that he seemed convinced I wasn't his biological son, and that he'd taken this to an extreme that endangered the family dynamic. I showed him the DNA results, emphasizing that they were identical across 2 independent labs and fully confirmed that I am his biological child. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he scanned the reports. This proves it?" he asked, voice shaking. "Yes, Dad. Multiple independent labs. The results are 100% consistent." Dad finally stood, running his hands through his hair. He looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. "I can't believe he would do this. My own son, manipulating the family like this. My son trying to make you seem like you don't belong?" We agreed that Dad needed to confront Mason immediately. Mason arrived shortly afterward, thinking he was still in control, ready to defend his concern for the family. Dad asked him directly, "Have you been trying to prove that your brother isn't my son?" Mason froze. At first, he tried to deny it, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Dad held up the DNA reports, the photos, the timeline. Mason's expression shifted from defiance to panic. He stammered, then broke down crying, insisting that he was only trying to protect Dad's interests. Dad was firm. "Mason, your obsession and deception have damaged this family. You will not have contact with us until you get professional help and acknowledge that your theory was false. This is not negotiable." Mason left, defeated and silent. He blocked me and Dad on every channel. The house, once tense with paranoia, felt calm for the first time in months. Dad hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry you had to endure this," he said. "I can't believe what he did." In the days after Mason left, the house felt quieter, but the emotional aftermath lingered. Dad and I spent hours talking, going over every detail, making sense of how Mason could spiral so far. He was shocked by how manipulative Mason had been, yet he was also relieved that the truth was finally out. Dad told me he'd decided Mason needed professional help before any contact could resume. "I'll pay for therapy if he's willing," he said, "but until he acknowledges what he did, I won't risk our family being torn apart again." I focused on rebuilding my sense of safety and trust. The betrayal had cut deep. This was my brother, someone I had shared childhood memories and holidays with, trying to erase me from the family. It hurt in ways I couldn't put into words. But with Dad's support, I felt anchored. I realized that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, at least for now. Mason had tried to rewrite reality, manipulate everyone around him, and jeopardize my relationship with Dad. That couldn't be ignored or excused. Over the next few weeks, family gatherings slowly returned to normal. Extended relatives still asked about Mason, but Dad assured them he was taking steps to address the situation responsibly. He emphasized the importance of trust, honesty, and psychological well-being. The focus shifted back to shared memories, family history, and the connections that truly mattered. I also reflected on my own resilience. For months, I had endured manipulations, gaslighting, and psychological pressure without lashing out. I had documented everything, trusted evidence over emotion, and stayed calm even when Mason tried to provoke me. That discipline paid off. The truth, ultimately, was unshakable. I've chosen to distance myself from Mason permanently. Even if he seeks therapy or reconciliation in the future, I don't know if I can rebuild the relationship. Some relationships, once broken by deception and obsession, cannot be restored. I'm at peace with that decision. Dad and I have been closer than ever. He reassured me that my place in the family is secure and that inheritance or legacy will never be manipulated by paranoia. The trauma of Mason's actions lingers, but the family unit that matters, Dad, me, and the supportive relatives, has survived. I've learned that even when someone you love becomes unrecognizable, truth and integrity will prevail. Mason's obsession caused chaos, but it could not erase what was real: my family, my identity, and the bond I share with Dad. Finally, for the first time in months, I feel a weight lift. The house is quiet, the air is clear, and I can breathe again. I'm no longer fighting for proof of who I am. I am my father's son, and no obsession or manipulation can ever change that. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.